Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cyber PMM Podcast, the only show dedicated to helping cyber PMMs fight digital chaos, cut through the hype, and do more with less. Let's dive in. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Cyber PMM Podcast. It's been quite a break. I haven't done an interview in a while, but I am excited today because an old friend and colleague of mine, Ken Dunham, has agreed to join me for a conversation just about cyber. He brings 30 years of consulting experience in cybersecurity leadership, incident response, dark web operations, malware research and response, and strategic transformation. He is based in Idaho, and he's been somebody that I've worked with in the past at Optiv, where he implemented the Optiv Threat DNA platform. And I remember being a part of that. So Ken and I have worked together in the past. But he's also done a lot of really interesting things around the world of cyber, and we're going to get into that in today's conversation. So, Ken, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for carving out the time.
Yeah, Dane, it's great to be here. Thank you. I'm excited.
All right, cool. So there's a lot that we can cover. Maybe we can do a therapy session, but I think maybe we should just cut straight into cybersecurity. And the starting point I always like to go into is just how did you get into it? Because everybody has a unique path. I
Mm.
certainly didn't grow up saying I want to work in cyber. I don't know if you did, but what inspired you to get into cyber in the first place? Because you've been doing it for, you said 30 years, right? So
Yeah.
just how did that all start for you?
Well, it's actually probably closer to 35 now in terms of making money at it and all that. But yeah, I'll never forget it. It was actually a teacher. And one day that teacher pulled me aside and said, check this out. And at the time I was programming and doing all this on a board and learning basic and things like that. And they had me grab this little device. It was connected to a cable, and on the screen, it had this little arrow thing, and I could move it, and it would move the arrow, and it was called a cursor. And I was all like, "Whoa!" And this idea of a mouse and a cursor and something other than a keyboard was life changing for me. I was like so fascinated by this new technology. And it was a Macintosh, and I just was blown away by what technology could do. I mean, after typing on a keyboard and being fast and furious and just loving that and being mathematically inclined and all of this, that just totally rocked my world. I got into programming Fortran, I started a computer club, and I just went crazy after that.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like so many stories I've heard when when technology and computer science itself was starting to really,
Mhm.
develop. It was a light bulb moment for so many at that era. So it
Mhm.
sounds like that's what triggered the journey for you. And take everyone through. So what was the first kind of exposure that you had? Did you go to school to study computer science, or, how did that all work for you?
Well, like everyone, I went to college to make sure my parents were proud of me. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I went out there to kind of grow up. I won't talk about that. But, when I was out there in college, there wasn't really a lot of degrees or computing or whatever like there is today. And so I went into biology, and I
Hmm.
couldn't pass organic chem. Man, I sucked at formulas. I hadn't quite developed a couple of things in my head at the time. I was a late bloomer that way. And so then I switched over to teaching. And then it turned out I needed
Okay.
to pass it anyway. And I'm like, seriously? And then I passed it. I aced the final exam, no problemos, because I all of a sudden everything just clicked, and then it was easy. School became trivial for me about halfway through. And then I was on the honor roll, and all of a sudden I had like photographic memory. Things just it was just life changing for me. Everything became very easy all of a sudden. And anyway, in college, I just continued on my own. I found that I was kind of all by myself. There's an 80s song about this thing, all by myself. But I was out there programming at being on a project, and people were talking about, let's write this up or that. And, you're just trying to get people to show up and do their work. And I'm like, well, why don't we program that? We could do a hypercard stack. And they're like, what are you talking about? And they loved me being on a project because I would go get it done on computers, and it'd be awesome. And then we'd have LAN parties, and I'd find a few people that knew, and we all just globbed onto one another, and we'd have a LAN party, and someone else would come in and try to join, and then we'd all like, all right, they're in galaxy number 7, and we'd all just go in there and just destroy whoever was not part of our whatevers, and we're like, that's right, it's our galaxy. And so we had
Interesting.
fun. And I learned how to get on the internet back in the day on my own by going to Kinko's, if you remember Kinko's. And I got a
Sure.
packet that was like, I think it was a half an inch thick that I paid for. And I read through that and I learned like the file transfer protocol and I started downloading things, but then I'd get gobbledygook. I'm like, what is this garbage, you know? And I learned how I had to manually go through the protocols and learn those from scratch in the 80s. And once I learned how to manually do the file transfer protocol from scratch and handle that and encode and decode and all of this, that, and the other, and then finally get something that worked, it was like, and then I was on fire because then I was gopher up and then I was writing articles and helping people on the internet before it was the internet proper back in 1995 once everybody else had it for the rest of the world. So I kind of learned from protocol level up and it was a lot of fun.
So when you say LAN parties, that's local area network, I'm assuming.
Yes.
And so,
Right.
okay.
Yeah. And we had that on the Macintosh. We had some primitive networks back in the day on Apple Talk networks. And there was this one space game that we could play. And there was a limited area on the one network we could play. And some people would go in there and play that. And you could go into different galaxies and then attack and kill and cloak and be like Star Trek. And we would do that. And a couple of people found out about it and they tried to come in and be part of that. But there was a very small group of people that really knew what they were doing. And we knew who we were and
Yeah.
and so it began. And at the time,
Sure.
actually, interestingly enough, if you mapped out the actual backbone of the internet, the entire Pac Northwest went right through that wall at Oregon State University, right through the second and third floor of the library. That was the limbpack of the backbone of the internet. And so if there was a problem with NetFlow or DDoS type issues or whatever, it was literally on that floor right there. Yeah,
Wait,
region. So if you look
just
at
that local
like traffic
network. Okay.
lanes, that's like if you ever do DDoS, anti-DDoS, and other things, you'll see that it's like a bunch of traffic lanes all around the world, and this is how things are routed and rerouted. And there wasn't a lot of infrastructure last century like there is
Sure.
today, and that was a main pipeline for the internet before we had internet made for everyone else. The real internet, as everyone knows it today, didn't occur until around 1995. It was restricted to military and educational, and I got an exception by partnering with some educational people back in the day, and that's how I got into it early. And at the time, it went through that university right there, and that was the main backbone for the Pac West area, if I remember correctly. So it was, if you had slowdown issues or whatever, it's because that's where the pipe was, and it needed to be upgraded, and well, there wasn't a lot.
Wow.
And of course, today everything's very different.
So you were one of the first users of the internet, basically, in terms of like that access before 1995, where one of the, like, not
Well,
first out of 10,
I
but
wouldn't say I was
the
first. I
first
mean,
group
I'm just a guy that was using it
group
early
of
on.
users.
The
Right,
internet
right.
goes way back before that, back at the Pentagon. I'd been in the room where it was started, and that sort of
Okay.
thing on the west side of the Pentagon there. But yeah, it wasn't used by a lot of people. It was mostly limited to educational and military institutions, and they had a couple of servers that were designed to have files, and you could use gophers to go and find those files or capture those. And then they had some bulletin boards and some limited communications and emails and things of this nature. And then in 1995, we had two major things that occurred. We had the internet as we know it explode and make available, and we had 32-bit operating system by Microsoft. They beat Apple because Apple had some partnership and negotiation issues that went south, and as a result, it delayed their go-to-market, and Microsoft beat them. And the 32-bit operating system, from a hardware perspective and software and that integration, allowed for them to dominate in the market, and that's why Windows became such a big deal, for
Yeah, so
speed.
basically this was when, if I remember, this was when I first started with like AOL. I remember
Hmm.
getting a compact computer in my
Right.
home. It was a huge deal for our house, and
Yes.
just logging in and that sound of, I can't do it off the top of my head, but everybody knows that AOL screen name. Right. I'll stitch that in the post production here, but and maybe replace whatever
2400
Ken just
baud
tried
rate
to do.
modem. Yes, yes. I know that one
Right.
well.
You know what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
Yeah, but that was a special time. And yeah, the whole Microsoft versus Apple. And then I was listening to a Steve Ballmer interview the other day, and sounds like, even in the 80s, they were aggressively, pushing things forward.
Mhm.
But it wasn't, like you said, widely adopted until the mid the mid 90s.
It
So,
wasn't until
um,
1995 that it became basically available for the average consumer. Back in the 80s, we were dealing with adoption of hard drives and different operating systems. That's when we had different kinds of IBM and Apple come out, and we went from floppy to hard drive. I remember I got my first hard drive, and I was like, oh, life is so much better. But we started to have different kinds of viruses come out. I got my first virus in 1989, and I had incidental corruption of a file, and I lost a significant amount of it. And I went in and learned how to do some content inspection, and I didn't realize what I was doing, but I was kind of doing like forensics recovery and capture, and I was able to
mhm.
recover about 30% of the file, and that kind of made me pissed off, and thus began my career. And I
Huh.
started
Wow.
consulting and doing things. And a couple of years later, I ended up in. I did a whole bunch of programming and whatnot, and I was helping somebody out. And I'm like, "What's all this code?" And they're like, "I don't know. It just keeps showing up." I'm like, "What do you mean it just keeps showing up?" And it was in a hypercard stack. And in the world of hypercard, there's a home card, and then there's stacks that you make. And from an application level, what we'd seen previous was things that would infect disks and executables. We'd never seen anything that would infect a file that was related to something like on an application layer, like think macro viruses today that infect like a doc file or Excel file or something like that. We had
Hmm.
never seen those things before. That had not existed previously, and this was the first time we'd ever seen anything like that. So when I discovered that, I was like, "That's a virus." And it was replicating to the home stack, and then anything that would get created or put on that machine going forward, it would copy itself over to that and then spread. And I'm like, this is a worm.
Hmm.
And so I contacted Symantec, and then there was another, I forget the other name of the other Mac company at the time that did Mac antivirus, and nobody knew what it was, and they didn't know how to handle it. And I was trying to work with them, and they were basically not helpful. And so I got on the internet, worked with all my friends globally, and we came up with a solution. We wrote some antivirus software, and that was helpful, but it wasn't what I wanted because I wanted to do preventative to the left of boom solutions, and I wanted to do more than what we did collectively as a group. So then I programmed my own software, and next thing you know, I number one website, number one software, number one everything, and then people asked me to start to work for them. I was just doing all this for free, and I had the number one downloaded. It wasn't just the number one antivirus; it was the number one downloaded everything for the whole world of Apple and Macintosh at the time in the world with 1 million downloads every single month. It was overwhelming all the servers, and they were like, "We don't want this on here. It's too much, Mr. Dunham. Get it off." And so I loaded it on other places around the world because it was overwhelming everybody. It was just so popular, and free is a great price. And this is before we had GitHub or all the cool things we have today to disseminate open source or freeware.
Right.
Because I didn't believe
I
you
mean,
should
so
have
you
to pay
created
for
a
it.
product. Basically, you created a product
Right.
and marketed it. So you were a product marketer back
Yeah,
in the
but
day.
I
I
did it
mean,
for free, and I marketed it and I branded it, and
oh, it was
and
free.
then
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. And later I did things for money because you gotta live.
Yeah.
But that resulted in some people coming to me and saying, "Well, wouldn't you rather get paid for some of this?" I said, "Well, I don't think people should have to pay for that, because they're getting attacked." And but they said, "Well, we'll pay you to help people." And I said, "All right, well, I'm down for that." And at the time, you might
Mhm.
remember there was only two kinds of ways to surf the internet when it first came out to the consumer. And as opposed to the old ways of command line and all that. And in the browser based world, it was help me out, see if you know this, Stain. You could get on there and you could go to Yahoo. Remember? And it was a drop
Oh,
down.
Yahoo.
That's right.
Yes.
And it was just a drill down. It was like, okay, football and pick your team, or you could go into
Yes.
fantasy football. And it was just a drill down thing. And somebody picked that, and,
Hmm.
and they either had it in there or not. Right. And then the other
That's
one
right.
was Alta Vista, which is kind of like Google today. And,
Okay.
and that's all
Okay.
that we had. There wasn't really anything else. Now, there were still the bulletin boards, there were still the hidden places or whatever that you may or may not have known about or not been able to find and quote dark webby, but that's a whole nother discussion. But it wasn't like all the resources we have today to find things. And there wasn't people behind the internet or social networking or anything like that. So we created
Yeah.
the first ever person behind the internet with about.com. And so they hired me as one of the leaders of this space, being a person behind a website. They said, come over to about.com. We originally called it the Mining Co. and then we renamed it to about.com, and it was later sold to Prime Media Group, and I think it's still out there. And what we
Interesting.
did is we put people behind different areas of subject matter expertise. And then you could come over there, and if you wanted to know about antivirus, anything, I was the guy for about 5 years. And I would help you. I had a following. I was like a cyber Kardashian, essentially. I had a following of 350,000 people every single week that was active. I had a number one best-selling book at the time in the space, and I was writing articles and doing all this. And I was only spending about 10 hours a week on it. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
10, you said?
10. Yeah, it was
10
just a
hours? Yeah.
part-time job because at the time I was teaching originally, and then I jumped out of
Hmm.
that because I wasn't making enough to take care of my budding family, and I was ambitious and I wanted to make more of a difference in the world. So then I jumped out into the world of reconnaissance and emergent technology and helping out the Air Force and stuff like that. And just a side job, something I was passionate about.
That's, yeah. So that's quite a shift, right? You go from basically about.com and focusing on more or less helping this very early stage venture that
Mhm,
nobody knows what's going on yet. I
mhm.
mean, realistically, and then you transferred to a military focus. How did that
Yeah.
connection happen? Is that
Well, I was a full-time teacher and a family man and a dad, and I was just
right?
programming on the side. And then I got asked to do this part-time job at about.com, so I'm doing that. And then in there, I'm like,
Okay.
instead of teaching, I need to make more money to raise my kid. We're having kids
Right.
now, and I tried to get upgraded
Yeah.
positions in teaching, and that just wasn't working out. And I was ambitious, and so I ended up getting this job working for Reflectone and British Air, and they were looking for somebody that was a risk taker and was emergent and willing to think outside the box and do things different and was state of the art stuff. And I was doing all of that. And I had these things I was doing in technology that no one else was doing. I didn't realize how on the edge I was. I was just doing whatever I was doing. And I was
Yeah.
winning awards and doing. I had no idea though, and I won't
Yeah.
go into all of that, but I was doing some cool stuff, and so I was the perfect guy for the job. So I started off with the U2 project, and the U2 had been around for a very long time. I won't talk about how long,
That's
but
the plane, the airplane, the
the
spy plane,
U2 reconnaissance spy plane, absolutely.
recon.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Yeah, and that's where I started. And so they'd been flying the plane for a long time, but they needed somebody to standardize the training for the pilots and the navigators, and that was my job. So I was hired to do that. When I walked into Beale Air Force Base, it was literally an empty room with two pieces of cardboard on the ground, and that's what I started with. And so I went into that and I incepted a new program, and we created something that the general called super awesome. And then we won the Warthog program, and then we won the Predator program, which I'm most proud of. And that was
That's the
out of the
first
drone.
drone, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I incepted that program. What I did is I took the concepts and precepts that we learned out of these other ones, and we figured out what works and what doesn't work, because the U2 is a very special plane. For example, you have to stall the engine about 10 feet above the ground because it has so much buoyancy, especially after you've done a mission. You can't land it with the engine on, and you have to land it just right. So we train people in sports cars and we drive underneath the plane, and then an expert pilot drives that plane while the other expert pilot kills the engine at the just right height so you can then land the plane. There's a lot of things about this plane that I will not disclose, but it's complicated. They talk about it, and we only accept people that are top guns into the program, top 2% in the world, to become the top 1%. And then we train them to fly it, and then we train them to not be killed if they're shot down. Those are the two things we do in the program, and because they are not protected if they are shot down. So we go through that program, and we learned a lot of things through that all had to be creatively thought out of the box. Like, how do you do something that's never been done before, and solve really hard problems at altitude or in these unique environments where you're solving really complex things, and there's multiple payloads and complex things you're doing in military operations and reconnaissance. And there's a lot to these things. Once you research it, you'll understand it's very complex. And there's a lot of
Hmm.
different applications. And the nature of conventional warfare is changing significantly. So that makes your training very complex. And in the grapevine, if you're off by less than 1%, you'll be shot down and killed. So you cannot rely on computers. You have to be exactly perfect or you'll die. So there was a lot on the line there, and that's what we trained towards. And that's how we then used all those lessons learned to apply that to this new way of thinking, which changed conventional warfare as we know it in the Predator program out at Area 51. So, yeah, and we made a big difference.
Yeah, and I mean, Area 51 is often associated with UFOs, and
Mhm.
it all is starting to make a lot of sense because that's where you're testing these drones. And so people see a test of an awkward shaped for the first drone for the first time flying at rapid speeds, and they're like, "Oh, look, UFO," but it probably was just, the Air Force running tests on these.
I like you, Dane.
But
Let's move on.
no more Area 50. Oh man, I was hoping to go into
No,
UFOs.
it's an
No,
area with a lot of topography, and it's great for training of pilots and
yeah,
planes and things of that nature. It's a no-brainer.
right.
Nothing about that
Yeah.
secret. And there's a lot of soldiers out there because that's where we train. Duh. So there's nothing secret about that at all.
Yeah, there's a very famous show right now called Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. There's a place up
Hmm.
in northeastern Utah. You might like it. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, let's move on. I think, so I mean, but for you in that time, right? Was that like the most exciting point for you to go to be exposed to all these complex systems and technologies and like U2, the Predator? I mean, that's, you went from about.com and thinking about those types of like, I guess and by comparison, a smaller scale system to these hyper complex life or death systematic types of thought. Was that for you just like, was that a difficult transition or did you just pick it up easily, or like how did that
Well, my mom,
transpire?
100% credit. My mom struggled in school, and some people judged her and treated her poorly. But my mom told me that it's hard to fit in a box if you've never been in one. And she was right about
Mm,
that. And my mother, some people thought she was stupid or not very successful. And she went on to be number one in her field globally. And she's extremely successful. And her field, she's an artist and she ends up being creative. And she's passed on now. But I didn't know this after she passed. Some of the most famous people in the world were her clients. And
mm,
I remember making and doing those artistry projects with her and very high ranking people all around the world, dignitaries and all of this. And so my mother was incredibly accomplished. And the reason why is because she was very creative and she was fearless and persevering and she was a risk taker and she had a lot of moxie to put up with other people's guff. um, when you're famous, people will love you and people will hate you, guaranteed.
mm,
And it doesn't
mm-hmm.
matter what you've done or not done. That's people. And my mother taught me that. So when I did these projects, I wasn't thinking about people. I was thinking about trying to do a good job and be successful and working hard because that's what I learned on
Mm-hmm.
the farm. Because if I didn't, my mom was going to whoop my butt. And that's what I learned growing up. And my father, I have an outstanding father as well, was right there to, toe the line. And he talked a lot about character and loyalty and, family values. And that's what I learned growing up. So um, I just came from good stock, and, people that taught you that what matters in life is about family and faith and focus and things like that.
Right. So, I mean, you were really actively just really focusing in on these complex problems
Hmm.
and
That's right.
every day showing up, just problem
Yep.
solving and
Right.
applying, you know, nice. Yeah.
Other people are
I
focused on
mean,
politics and gossip and all of that. And to be honest, I was incredibly ignorant of most of that in my early career. It would have been better for
mm,
me to be more aware of those things. But to be honest, I could give a crap.
yeah.
And I was just putting my nose to the grindstone and just working really hard and doing my best. And over time, I got better at understanding the people factor because people factor does matter. And when I was an early leader, I made a lot of mistakes because I didn't understand the people side of things as well as I needed to. I was good at doing things. I could figure stuff out and all of that. But a great leader always understands his people really well. And
Yeah.
so you have to
Yeah.
understand emotions and people's hearts, minds, and motives, and thus politics and the ugly
Right.
truth. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, and it's interesting. If you look at the age we're in now, the AI era, the intelligence part is becoming
Mm.
easier because you have access to these LLMs and tools that can just, okay, problem solved in a sense. But the EQ factor is becoming more important and more of a premium for people to understand and to like deal with emotions and understand how to navigate people in the organization is becoming like more of an important attribute, I think, because the problem solving and the intelligence and the like the actual outputs are getting easier to do in a lot of cases.
Mhm.
So it's interesting you say that. I've been thinking about that more. It's like, what are these, like, where do people apply and try to train up and get more skills? It's sometimes it's like you might want to spend some time on the EQ front and develop that emotional intelligence to lead people.
I just finished up my book on cyber CISO marksmanship, and it was 100% storytelling. And most of it's
Oh yeah.
around, yeah, how do you connect with people? As a
Okay.
leader, people often think, I got to know more. Because how did you get to
Right.
be a great leader, or how did you get promoted? It was by Johnny, get her done or go to, or whatever. And that's how you got there, right? But the problem is once you get there, that's not what people need from you as a leader. They need you to be there for them. In order to be there
Mhm.
for someone, you need to understand, like, I'll never forget it. Someone that's close to me and family who's a well recognized global leader who's now retired. I remember we were out at a family thing and they received a call from someone, and this person was clearly had made a mistake or something. And this leader said, things like understanding what the person was saying, acknowledging that they were concerned or afraid and anxious, and reassuring them that everything was going to be perfectly fine, and that they have their six and they make mistakes too. And they
Right.
came right alongside them to help them to realize it was going to be okay and they could be trusted with this.
Right.
And it's a big deal because if somebody just screwed up and they feel like they can trust you, you're going to get a very different result as opposed to someone that's anxious, ambiguous, or in a fearful place. And how many bosses do you have that would actually come alongside you with that kind of EQ? Like, I would love to have a boss like that, right? A lot of bosses just
Absolutely.
give you a silent treatment, or they wrap your knuckles, or they don't listen, or they make assumptions, or they're part of the problem, or they put
Right.
HR and then HR ends up being part of the problem. And,
Yeah.
that's not great. And then you wonder why you have retention problems.
Yeah.
On you,
Yeah. No,
baby.
it's yeah, I saw this study on leadership recently. Can't peg the name. It was just basically like, what are the top traits of the most effective leaders? And
Hmm.
number one on the list was communication, right?
Hmm.
And it's so true. Like if you look on all these problems that stem in the organization are from either a lack of communication, poor communication, sideways communication. There's like lack of clear written documentation. It's communication, and then it's like responding in the right way in the right time when one
Hmm.
of your employees has a problem. But yeah, no, that's important. And but yeah, you just glossed over something that we should talk about. So this new book that you published, I mean, as you know, I'm very into storytelling as a marketer, and a lot of the audience listening would be as well. So let's talk about storytelling a little bit. So why did you? It's a technical book but you used a storytelling approach for it. So how did that? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was running a practice at a company I worked for previously, multiple practices, and we found there was a gap that we're regularly running into with leadership. And some of my friends were like, we really need a book on this subject. So like, I'm so tired of writing books, and I really am. And publishers have been bugging me for years. I'm like, go away. And then I thought, this one we actually need. And there's a big gap right now in the world of CISOs. And CISOs are hung out to dry. It's a very thankless job. It's a newer job in the industry. And CISOs are not good at what they do, to be honest. They are usually the smart guy in the tent or the guy that knows it all from a technology perspective. And then they're not effective at communicating to the board. Like, let me come up and tell you all about how many firewall blockage hits, IDS, whatever is we got this. And the board could care less about that, actually. And I need more money for my intrusion detection. What? And the board could care less about that too. And what they need to know is how to connect with people emotionally and relationally.
Hmm.
They need to know what are the key things, and they need to get good at storytelling. And
Right.
these are key things. So um, we thought, as consultants, this is how we connect with people, is storytelling. And I went on this journey and I thought, well, what I need is to bring together some people with some great stories. And we just need to tell it how it is. And we need to anonymize it so it's safe for everyone. And we're not crossing any lines here, ethically, morally, or legally. And we need to put it out there so CISOs actually have something they can grow from. And we create a community going forward. So you're not just in a book, you're in a community going forward. And it's been awesome. When I was working with the authors, I'm like, man, I thought I had it bad. These guys had it way worse. And it was immediately validating. It was so awesome. And the stories were like, whoa, okay, wow, okay, lesson learned. And it was like when you get to a conference, you're going to sit down and have a drink with someone on sidebar or, that night over dinner, whatever. And you're going to, if I'm going to talk to you about phishing, it's not going to be a 20-minute PowerPoint deal, right, Dane? You're going to sit down and say,
Right.
tell me about whatever. And so the whole
Right.
thing is all about stories and storytelling, and that's what we're trying to do here is get people to start to communicate that way. And it was super fun.
And what was the name of it again, Ken?
Cyber CISO Marksmanship. Yeah, you can get it on Amazon or
Cool.
hit me up later if you want to know more about it. And then we have a community where we're trying to get it started where people will come together. We've done some prezos and get together at conferences, and we're going to try to host some private events. Like, I think probably next year I'll probably start to do Black Hat DEF CON again, and then I'll host a private event or something like that where we'll get together and bring together the people that are part of the book series and are the CISOs. You have to be a CISO or a CISO equivalent in order to participate. And then we'll get
Hmm.
together and we won't have freezos. We're going to have people that share their stories. And we'll get together and
Right.
talk about, like, what are you doing to deal with, this AI problem? Tell us your stories. And we'll have little storytelling
Tell us your
hours.
story.
We'll have firesides, and
Right.
it's all private, TLP read, that kind of thing.
Very cool. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Bringing the human element, and a place like DEF CON or Black Hat would be a
Hmm.
great venue for that. So let's pick it back up on the chain real quick. So from all that defense work, you get into the cyber industry, I'm assuming after all those projects completed and started your entry into like the true kind of cyber industry from a vendor perspective, or did you start consulting first for
Well,
companies?
I've been doing consulting and a bunch of other stuff, a mismatch of things. You do what you got to do when you're young, right? And then
Yes.
when I was Johnny World Famous, I could care less about that, to be honest. It was like it was great, made us some extra money on the side, but in my faith, I felt really convicted as a father and a budding family. I was like, even though it's only 10 or 15 hours a week, I want to spend more time with my family. I need to be more focused on that. So I quit my job at about.com and I gave it over to a friend of mine in the industry that I knew would do a good job with it. And I said, I just need to be one job focused really hard on just my family and raising my family. And when I did that, I got all these job offers to work remote for all these things full time in cybersecurity full time. And I'm like, whoa, I did not see that coming. And they were all from home. And for me, that
Perfect
that
timing.
was
Yeah.
it was a big deal in faith because I was rolling out soft phone and all these new ways of doing training for DirecTV at the time, and that was super rewarding. But I had to drive into town, and it was a completely different work environment. And now I have this opportunity I did not even see coming that through my faith, I could now be working at home and even be more of a dad with more opportunity and more rewards to better provide for my family. So I jumped at that and I ended up being Johnny New Hire. I worked for like 4 or 5 companies that year. It turns out it was, you remember the stock market crashed around the turn of the century? So I ended up working for
Yeah,
companies
dot
here.
com bust.
Yeah, totally. And then I
Yeah.
worked here in the Americas and then over in Europe and everywhere else. And I took a faith jump at working for this new company called iDefense. And it was just kind of like wavering, whatever, but it was something I was passionate about. It was in malware and intelligence and
Yeah.
security. And I just thought I would absolutely love that. I actually had a job that was offered to me. DirecTV came back and they said, look, you were amazing. We really want you back. We want you to work with all the senior executives. And would you please come back? And I was like, man, that's a really good job. But I'd rather work this job because I'm more passionate about it and I could work at home and I wouldn't make very much, but I'd rather do that out of my faith than go back to DirecTV. And so that's what I did. And as you know, iDefense ended up being a number one Magic Quadrant great ride for me. And that resulted in Eyesight Partners later with John Waters and the team and the invention of responsible disclosure and the pioneering
Hmm.
of cyber threat intelligence as we know it for the world and a whole bunch of really important things that really has defined my career.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sound the iDefense and then Eyesight and then somebody bought them. Is it
Yeah, so
I can't
iDefense got bought by VeriSign, and then I
Verisign, that's it.
became Johnny Talking Head that year. I did 100,000 miles of flying all over the world and stuff.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was a lot of talking. I was the number one quoted guy in the world that year for cyber. It was exhausting. And I said,
Sure.
I'm not going to keep doing this, guys. That's like I have a family and I'd like to keep it that way. And Verisign didn't really know what they wanted to do with us after M&A. After all, they were kind of like a registrar, protect the root servers of the internet kind of company.
Right.
And
Yeah. The
sometimes
SSL.
M&As they just buy, and they don't really know. And M&As don't always go well. I think that was an example of one where it sounded like a great idea, but it wasn't necessarily. I don't know. I was happy with it because I cashed out, but
Sure.
we ended up leaving there and then doing Eyesight Partners, which is kind of like an iDefense 2.0, where we took the
Hmm.
original pioneering of intelligence, and then Eyesight Partners was focused on native tradecraft, in-country intelligence, and taking it to the next level. And of course, we did do that, and that's now the Google Mandiant stuff that we have today. That was purchased by Fire Mandiant back
Gotcha.
in the teens,
And
and that's
now
now all
with
gold.
Google.
Hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Isn't that
Yeah.
crazy?
Yeah, and it's great. And
Yeah.
it's funny because I was actually on a call with those as a partner like last year, and they were saying, "Oh, we've taken this and we put this together, and it's so awesome." And they were trying to sell me on it, and I don't think the sales rep knew who I was. And she's telling me how great it was that they're integrating these two, and I'm like, "That's really great. I invented that 10 years ago." And she's like, "What?" And she thought I was full of myself, and I wasn't trying to be rude, but I was all like, "Well, I used to work over here." And that was the technologies we invented. And now that you put them together, that's going to be great. And I said, and I would emphasize the following because this is where that's going to go. And this is going to be super great. It's a really good plan. And I'm excited to see you've brought it to market because it is sweet to have that integration. And I'm really glad to see it mature
Right.
to that because that was our vision. And it's pretty exciting, now that they've brought it together. So,
And then what was your path after that? Was it more so because I remember like we crossed paths at Optiv, that must have been 2016 or so.
yeah. Well,
Now,
when we go through M&A, I would typically put myself in a lesser role. So I would downgrade
uh,
into a lesser role and I promote people that work for me into the senior roles. And then I would look into what could I do to move up and around and that kind of a thing. But then it ends up I just get laid off because they're like, why is this guy getting paid so much? Or, whatever for he's in this role. And it just didn't work out for me. And that's fine.
yeah.
Usually when you're in a higher role or you've been in a senior role, you're gonna get laid off or leave anyway. And so there you be it. But yeah, I took on the role at Optiv and led global ops over there. And as you know, I created the Optiv Threat DNA platform, and that was transformative. We went from the GTEC
Yep.
over into like now we have a integrated intelligence with real-time attribution, and we can actually name the malware, the country, the whole thing. That was
Yep.
a very big deal. And it wasn't just a
I
cool name,
remember
it
that.
was it was it was a
Yeah.
game changer. So I was
I
very proud
we
of that.
worked on that naming, and I remember putting it for all the product marketers out there. If you know how you
Mm.
have the architecture exercises,
Yeah.
like there was always that central component, the core is, and for Optiv's managed security services business, we eventually positioned the threat intelligence component as the core, which was originally called a GTIC, Threat Intelligence Center. And then
Hmm.
Ken came along and we did this whole pivot toward Threat DNA. And it was interesting. You started this interview with talking about your background in biology, and now it's starting to make sense a little bit. I'm
Hmm.
like, oh, so
Right.
that's where that might have.
That's
So, and
exactly
I
where it
think
came
that's where, okay.
from.
And do you see a lot of association between biology and cyber somehow, or is it
Yeah,
just because you
absolutely.
studied it?
No, it's always been
Okay.
there, and biohazard
Like
symbol I put
viruses,
together.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I drew that correlation early on. I was pioneering and part of the virus bulletin group way back in the day, and coordinated with Cairo and others. And I remember the first time I ever went to an international conference with them. I put together a custom biohazard symbol and hat, and I threw a big party for everybody in Chicago, and I gave that out, and everybody's like, "Oh, I've still carried that through to the industry to these days, and all the Virus Bulletin members, they'll know, they'll remember when I did that. I went down in a cummerbund, and I didn't like what I was served, and I was hungry, so I had a deep dish pizza in Chicago delivered to my gala dinner table, and I was making waves, but it was like, we're in Chicago, we're gonna have some pizza. Welcome to America.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to be rude, but we did have fun, and they did come to the suite, and let's kick off some biohazard, and that was how I started, in the international community with everybody. I didn't want to meet everybody in person for a long time because I had a lot to get done. And so that wasn't until the early 2000s that I met everybody in person. But once I did, it would be like I remember when I met one individual, it was in the Microsoft campus, I think it was, and I was going into the elevator, and he's like, Ken Dunham? And I'm like, yes. And it was Jose, over at Arbor. And I was like, hey, how you doing? And we've been communicating for like 10 or 15 years at the time. And, but I hadn't gotten out. But then I started to travel extensively at the turn of the century once I started to do intelligence work. And last year I was out of the country more than I was in it. So, yeah, things have changed.
Now, today we're seeing a lot more too of like autonomous self-healing terms in cyber. Do you see any potential for AI to start delivering upon, like, or at least resurfacing or a resurgence of this biology connection? Because I don't know, there's a lot of marketing out there around this about the self-healing and stuff. So, like, would you advise product marketers to, I don't know, stay away from that? Is it like
I'm so
BS in your
excited that
mind?
self healing has finally shown up, and that we'll all be put out of a job, and that everything will finally be made magically wonderful. We finally have our silver bullet,
Right.
Dane. Thank goodness.
It's
It's
so that's the
amazing.
thing, right? As long as you've been around cyber, has there always been a vendor talking about a silver bullet?
Yes, yes. And this is why I drink silver bullets. Yes. So, I get tired of the new shiny when it comes to
Hmm.
product marketers. And
Yeah.
let me tell you, I'll put it this way. When I was at Optiv and I was running the show over there, I had 2,300 vendors that rolled up to me. And I'll never forget it. Part of it was a little shocking. Like, I literally pioneered the space of intelligence with a group of elite people. And I rolled up tip providers, and I'm like, what the hell is this tip? And I looked it up, and it was a threat intelligence platform. I'm like, oh, is that what they call it now? And I'm like, oh, we called that a fusion center 20 frickin' years ago. And I'm not trying to
Hmm.
be arrogant, but I'm just,
Okay.
I'm thinking, all right, this is what we called it. And now there's an industry for it. And I didn't realize there was an industry because, again, I was busy just getting stuff done. Okay. Put your nose down, move ahead. And now there's a
Yeah.
whole industry that's plopped up and started to do these things. And I got on a call with one of the leading vendors, and you know who you are. And I hope you changed it. I know you did a little bit. But anyway, I got on there, and I'm the 95% of their pipeline at Optiv. And I listened to their little pitch, and they're telling me about how they run dark web operations. And they don't know that I ran real dark web operations for 20 years. Okay. And I won't tell you what all I did, but I made a big difference with a team of people, and we did a lot of good stuff. And I get on the call, and they're telling me all this dark web this, dark web that, and how cool they are. And of course, no one in the world really knows dark web, really. And whenever you get on there and you listen to some sales guy and he says that, you can't substantiate that. You're just going to believe that. And they state directed comments. And I happen to be an expert in this. And I'm like, well, what do you what do you mean by dark web? And then they start to talk
Mm,
about something like virus total. And I said, well, virus total would be a deep web search. That's something that requires credentials and it's a private database, and that's not dark web. And let's talk about your terms. And well, we have a guy and yeah, he gets on the internet. And I said, oh, really? I said, well, am I working with federal and international authorities on this subject? You'd have to commit illegal crimes. Are you committing illegal crimes in order to perform that? Because I helped to create some of those laws and arrest those criminals. And I'd like to know what you're doing in order to perform that. And can you explain to me exactly what you're doing? And all of a sudden, we had a different talk. And when we got done, I'm like, well, here's the deal. Don't misrepresent your product and don't sell me FUD. And can we stop that? You've got a good product and you do normalization, you do aggregation. I went down a list of a couple of things, and I really like it. And your integration is stronger than the others in this place in space. And that's what you should be focused on. And please, from a product marketing perspective, don't sell the sexy and the mysterious. That's not true because I find that offensive at best. And if you do that, I won't have anything to do with you here. And that's the answer I'm giving you today.
wow. See,
Yeah.
that's powerful because I mean it that's the power that we could have over sabotaging a relationship with a vendor or client as a product marketer is it's not just that you're misrepresenting the product, it's you're offending these experts that have lived this and done this because you're falsely misrepresenting your capabilities.
It's abusive of the industry and it's not acceptable. It's unethical. And in some cases, it might even be illegal and a misrepresentation. And I don't accept it.
Do you think is there more of a public private with cyber and intelligence agencies that's becoming a national priority? Do you find that it's get it given the right prioritization cyber at a national level?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, in America, we are primarily defended by corporations that are commercial enterprises, as opposed to China would be all China, and here it's like you have Boeing and their commercial enterprise, but how would our critical infrastructure be attacked? It would be through Boeing or through others, or Raytheon. Does that make sense?
It does. So are we more vulnerable because of that structure?
It's different. Yeah, it's very different. So China, for example, can control 100% of their environment very differently. America can from a governance perspective, because in America, we can hope that organizations will do things. We can put compliance and regulation out there, but there are separate commercial enterprises that can do whatever it is they want to do. And that might support 80 or 90% of our defensive infrastructure, but they're free and independent as opposed to controlled by the government. So, very different ways of doing things. I live
Right.
here in America. I love America. I support America as an American and happy to do that. But they are defended in very different ways from a nation state
Yeah.
perspective, and they use different tactics as well. And they have different kinds of allies and different kinds of vulnerabilities.
Yeah. I mean, you have to think though, like some industry segments are so important. So, I mean, you look at the grid,
Mhm.
protecting the grid has to be at certain point, there has to be national priority given to certain segments of you know, of the country, I would think, like such as operational technology in the grid and nuclear, like water systems, the advanced technologies like the AI
Mhm.
companies out in Silicon Valley,
Mhm.
the defense tech firms that are building the next kind of technology for space systems. I live in Colorado Springs. It's all you have the Space Force, and I would hope that those types of areas are getting more, I don't know, protection. But
Well, that's one that a lot of people don't talk about is low orbiting satellites and the fight in space. And that's for a different subject. That's one that's near and dear to me.
mhm,
In terms of power, though, nuclear power is the future of what's going to be behind AI. And whoever has the most power will have the AI nation state advantage for warfare differentiation. Most of the
Right.
discussions we have on AI today are around consumer applications, not nation state differentiated advantage. And the other thing I'll
Hmm.
say is when we talk about critical infrastructure control, most people don't understand how that works, but it's about strategic control, meaning let's assume that an adversary has control over your water, power, etc. And let's assume that America has the same over them. Okay, so you have control over both. It's more like a almost like a wrestling match, or if you've ever played that game Mercy, and that's what it's like.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right, right,
And
right.
so it's a strategic game of how one plays that in the world of diplomacy and strategy and finances. And China wrote a paper in around 2018, I think it is, for their 2035 goals on how they want to dominate the world with technology. And they're rapidly moving towards that. It's frightening if you look at it. And so there are efforts being done to slow those things down to give the world a chance. So there's a lot going on in the next few years, which is why you're seeing such significant changes right now. A lot of people would call it radical, but there needs to be radical change because there were a lot of concessions that were made in the last few years that for critical infrastructure and other attacks and things to take place and infiltration at unprecedented levels. Attack upon critical infrastructure is over 250%, I believe. Just the other day, nuclear systems compromised. I mean, it's significant, and this is all public knowledge.
No, it is. And there's a few podcasts I've been listening to lately. One is called, I think, the Sean Ryan podcast. He has a lot of guests that have been going over these topics, and I'm like just absorbing all this. It's really getting interesting lately, and I appreciate you bringing it up and covering that because you have such a deep vantage point and have seen firsthand some of the, like you said, with the Air Force work you did and all the things. So I was like, I got to ask Ken a little bit about that because it wouldn't be an interview with Ken if we didn't cover a little bit of that stuff. And we could probably go for a long time. But what I wanted to ask you about the, like you said, Wired, I'm curious, like
Mhm.
where do cyber experts like yourself, if product marketers in cyber are just starting out and we want to learn how to speak the language, but we were never practitioners, right? And so it's very difficult because we're writing and messaging about products, and those products are geared for practitioners, but we aren't or never were practitioners, right? How would you recommend like we learn to speak the language so we could tell better stories in our messaging?
Mm. Well, I would look for good storytelling examples and people that are good at storytelling. I think AI actually could be a really good help
Yeah.
on some of this. AI is actually pretty good, but I look at AI as kind of like an improved model of a website we all used to use not so long ago that was asking for funding. And there's usually something wrong with it, but it's not bad. I wrote up a policy a year ago. I was like, oh, you know what? I need to go get some OSINT on this and I'll gather. And I just went to AI and I typed it all up. And within about 5 minutes, I had a 7 page. I'm like, this is pretty solid. And then I went off and did some more research to fill in some of the gaps based off my experience. And it saved me a lot of time. It was kick butt. Um, so you can use AI built into your browser to say,
Yep.
tell me more about cyber threat intelligence. Tell me more about endpoint or whatever it is you need to learn about. And whatever you're stupid on, you can get kind of sort of smartish, kind of sort of quickish, and at least kind of know where to go. And then look for storytelling solutions because in the end, if you want to connect with people, you need stories. And then
Yep.
find some excerpts, find some podcasts or a good video or a person or three in your life where you can leverage or use those. I know that when I'm in the sales room or I'm talking with an executive, I'm going to share with them firsthand. You know what? When we took down the Russians, here's what we did. And there's no question on credibility. It's over. And we have capabilities, we have credibility, and then we have cash. We're done. So,
Yep. No, that's great. It's a great point. I could probably take the question I asked you and create a detailed prompt and, say, right. And then it just fired, oh, since you asked, and then just list it out with links. So,
mhm.
all right. Well, any advice? I usually like to close with advice for those of us in the industry that are, within vendors or even, it's not just for product market. There's a lot of builders,
Hmm.
founders, people that are building a new product. They don't even have a team. It's just them, and
Right.
they're building something new. And there's a lot of venture
Hmm.
funding right now, and people building cyber products. And
Yes,
so, what any advice to those of us that are bringing new
absolutely.
products to market? Yeah.
Be willing to risk and dream, and be willing to go outside the box. And even if people challenge you and tell you it's stupid or somebody gives you whatever, don't just listen to that one person. Lots of people are wrong. Job's friends were all wrong. So, you need to not just be ignorant to what people say, but I'm telling you that you need to believe in yourself, in your dream, and then you need to vet it and see if there's something to it. But um, any risk worth taking is worth jumping off a cliff for. So you need to believe in that and be a risk taker and be creative in that. I would say know your differentiation and know your marketplace. I'm shocked at the number of people that I go and talk to them in a startup and they just don't know where they sit or how they compete. And I'll go to somebody and they're like, well, what do the other products do for this or that? Or how do you differentiate? Or what makes you
Mm,
different? Or what makes you better? And if you can't answer those
hmm.
questions, get out of the market. Okay. You need
Right.
to know why you're good. And what you should be able to do is say, everybody should be as a core doing the following and good, better, best. Okay. And then what are we going to do either faster or better? And what are we going to do to differentiate? And if you can't differentiate, get out of the market. Because you know what? The world's got enough mediocre. You need to do something that's going to be great. And if you're not going to be great, get out of the market because you need to figure out how you're going to be great if you're going to be making a difference. And I don't think it's worth being around unless you're going to do something that's really going to make a difference. And you're going to be proud of yourself and you're going to have awesome teams if you're fighting to make a difference. If you shoot for mediocre and you don't quite hit it, that's not a good mark. So you got to shoot for great. And so, what does great look like? And that means you've got to do competitive analysis and you've got to be thinking about something that's beyond your reactive fires. You have to be thinking a little bit strategic. I would recommend carving out at least 30 minutes a week minimum every Friday at beer 30 or whatever it's going to be, but you need to find time to just think about it. And I work best when I collaborate with someone and I talk for just a little bit on XYZ, and then I have a little bit of time to think about it. And those are the things that work for me. Figure out what works for you and dream. And if you dream and you camp on that, next thing you know, you'll have a vision. And if you can create that vision and then figure out steps to get there, you'll be able to do something that no one else has done. And the last thing I'll say is I've had plenty of people tell me in my career, this is not possible. And I can't tell you how many times I've pulled off the impossible after I was told that. So don't believe
Mm,
it when you hear it.
I like that. And you mentioned faith and dreams, and
Mhm.
I totally agree with you, and that's been something that's very important for me as well. So that's cool that we share that aspect, and I'm glad you brought it up because I do think it's a critical part. And then having that ability, that kind of courage, right, to go pursue what it is that you have as a dream. That's very good advice.
Yeah.
So
And, I've been very successful, but whenever I start to take the credit, it all goes south. So I'm just thankful.
yeah.
I had a very serious injury in 2019 and I nearly died twice. And
Mm,
I went from being a global thought leader to thoughtless in a second. And I couldn't function. And the doctors told me I'd
mm.
never get better. My spine is still off by 1 inch, and it caused a lot of problems for me. But through my faith and firing my doctors and relentlessly pursuing it, I am now better. And so, again, dream and believe and
Yep.
overcome.
That's great to hear. I'm glad you recovered from that. Ken, I really do appreciate you joining this time, and I think there will be people that benefit from this conversation. But let's recap again, like where people can find out more about you, or do you have any like requests of the audience? You mentioned your book earlier. That's on Amazon, LinkedIn. I know you're
Mhm.
probably not too happy about new requests without any context. So if you're like me, at least put a note in if you're going to request Ken to be a connection. I would suggest. Is that
You
fair
you
to say?
actually can you can accept. I'll do anything actually because
Oh, okay.
That's a longer story, but I'm very well
Uh-huh.
connected, and yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn. And then I have a private boutique firm I've been running since 1992, 4D 5A Security. So if you want to have us help you out on lowering your risk ahead of time, our goal is we're ninjas at night. So I've got my day job, I'm busy, but I've got guys that are the best in the world around the world that will come in and help you lower risk in the evenings and weekends, and when they're available during the day, and we'll help you affordably reduce your risk, and that's pretty fun too. So yeah, love to work with you.
There you go. I like that. Ninjas at night. That's a cool
Yeah,
slogan. I'm going to have
yeah,
to use that in some variation. Well, Ken, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it. Had a great time chatting with you today.
yeah. You too, Dane. Thank you.
Well, that does it for this episode of the Cyber PMM Podcast. If you found this episode valuable, please subscribe, leave a comment or review, and let's connect on LinkedIn. Be sure to check out cyberpmm.com for more resources. And you can also subscribe to the Cyber PMM newsletter on Substack and LinkedIn to keep up to speed with everything you need to fight digital chaos, cut through the hype, and do more with less. See you next time.